She was 17 years old, and her name was Dios Kyairi Gómez. On a Thursday morning in late summer, she kissed her mother goodbye and walked out the front door of her home, her entire future waiting for her at the university just a few miles away. Her mother, Bernarda, watched her go, just like she did every day, with no reason to believe that this time would be any different, that this time her daughter would never come back. But then the hours started to pass, and the calls went straight to voicemail, and the silence that filled that house was heavier than anything Bernarda had ever felt. She called friends, she called the university, she called everyone who knew her daughter, but the answer was always the same. No one had seen her, no one knew where she was, and deep down, in that place where mothers just know, Bernarda already felt something was terribly wrong. And while she was out searching the streets, while the neighbors were forming groups to look for her daughter, while everyone was desperately trying to find Dios Kyairi, there was one person who knew exactly where she was, one person who had seen her last, one person who had been with her in those final moments, and that person was living right under the same roof, eating at the same table, pretending to be just as worried as everyone else. By the time the truth came out, by the time the police finally put the pieces together, Dios Kyairi Gómez was already gone. Her body had been found in a field burned beyond recognition. And the man who did it, the man who took her life and then tried to erase her from existence, had been standing right beside her mother the whole time, searching, grieving, lying, and no one had any idea. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Dios Kyairi Gómez was born in November of 1999 in the Dominican Republic, a bright and ambitious girl who dreamed of becoming a psychologist and helping people. And she was just about to start that journey when her life was stolen from her. She lived in the municipal district of Rincon in the province of La Vega with her mother Bernarda and her younger siblings, and they were a family well known in their community, active in their church, and surrounded by friends who loved them. In 2015, Bernarda began a relationship with a man named Alberto Antonio Sanchez Reynoso, and soon after, he moved into their home, and to anyone looking in from the outside, they seemed like any other ordinary family, a mother, her children, and a stepfather who had come to be part of their lives. But behind closed doors, something was happening that no one saw coming, something that Dios Kyairi tried to tell people about but couldn't find the words for, something that her own mother never noticed until it was far too late. By the time Dios Kyairi was 17 years old, she had already started to pull away from her home. She had started spending more time with friends. She had started looking for ways to escape, but no matter how far she tried to go, the danger was always waiting for her when she came back. She had even gone to live with her father for a while because she felt safer there, because she told him she didn't want to be around Alberto, because something about that man made her skin crawl, made her feel like she was being watched, made her feel like she was trapped. Her father wanted her to stay. He wanted her to finish her education and build a life far away from that house. But Alberto kept insisting that she come back, that she needed to be with her family, that she belonged under his roof. And when he said those words, there was something in his voice that should have alarmed everyone who heard it, something that sounded less like a father worried about his stepdaughter and more like a man who couldn't stand the thought of her being anywhere else. 3 days before she disappeared, Dios Kyairi called her father and told him again that she wanted to come back, that she didn't feel comfortable at her mother's house, that she was afraid of Alberto and didn't want to be around him anymore, and her father told her yes. He told her she could come. He told her she would be safe with him, and he believed that this time, finally, she would get out. But 3 days later, on the morning of August 31, 2017, Dios Kyairi left her home at around 8:45 a.m. to attend an orientation session at the university where she was about to begin her psychology studies. Before she left, she told her mother she would be back between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, just like she always did, and she called at 10 a.m. to say she was on her way, and that was the last time Bernarda ever heard her daughter's voice. As the hours passed and Dios Kyairi didn't come home, Bernarda started calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She called her friends, but none of them had seen her. She called the university, but no one had any record of her being there, and by 4:30 p.m., The worry that had been building in her chest had turned into something far worse, something cold and heavy and suffocating, the feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The neighbors heard what had happened, and they came out in droves, searching the streets, checking the paths Dios Kyairi usually walked, calling her name into the empty spaces where she should have been. And they went with Bernarda to the police station to file a missing persons report, and the community mobilization was so overwhelming that the authorities had no choice but to start searching immediately. But no matter how hard they looked, no matter how many people joined the effort, Dios Kyairi had already vanished without a trace, swallowed up by the very person she had been running from. The very next morning, on September 1, a column of smoke began to rise from a plot of land in the municipality of Fantino, in the province of Sanche Ramiers, and when the neighbors rushed over to see what was happening, they found the body of a young woman engulfed in flames, and they tried to put out the fire, they tried to save her, but it was already too late. The body had been left there just moments before, the flames were still burning, and whoever had done this had tried to destroy any evidence by setting her on fire. But they had been interrupted, and the neighbors' quick actions meant that the body wasn't completely consumed, which gave the forensic experts just enough to work with. For a few hours, everyone in the Dominican Republic was holding their breath, hoping it was someone else, hoping it wasn't who they feared it might be. But then the autopsy results came back, and the worst possible news was confirmed. The victim was Dios Kyairi Gómez, a 17-year-old girl who had only wanted to become a psychologist and build a future for herself. The autopsy revealed that Dios Kyairi had died from asphyxiation. She had been strangled to death, and the burns had been inflicted after she was already gone, in a deliberate attempt to make identification harder and destroy any forensic evidence that could lead back to the killer. There was no DNA under her fingernails. There were no signs of a struggle that could point to a stranger, and the investigators had almost nothing to go on, except for the fact that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to cover up this crime, someone who had planned it, someone who had made sure there would be no witnesses, someone who had tried to erase Dios Kyairi from the world as if she had never existed at all. The first person the police looked at was Dios Kyairi's ex-boyfriend, a young man she had reported for abuse a year earlier, a case that had mysteriously gone nowhere. But when they found him and questioned him, he had an alibi that checked out, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime, so they had to let him go. And once again, the case was stuck with no clear suspect and no direction to go in. But then, a witness came forward and said they had seen Dios Kyairi getting into a white car near the municipal park in Fantino, a car that was being used as a taxi, and that small detail, that one piece of information, would end up changing everything. The police pulled the security footage from the area, and there she was, Dios Kyairi, walking calmly, approaching the white vehicle, and getting inside at 9:46 a.m. on the morning of her disappearance. And then, just seconds later, another man got into the same car. The image was grainy and the quality was poor, but the man's build, his posture, the way he moved, it was so familiar to anyone who knew him that the investigators were able to make a positive identification almost immediately. And when they did, the shock that rippled through the room was unlike anything they had ever experienced. That man was Alberto Sanche Reynoso, Dios Kyairi's stepfather, the man who lived in the same house, the man who had been sleeping under the same roof, the man who had been right there with Bernarda the entire time, searching for Dios Kyairi, comforting her, pretending to be just as devastated as she was. And now the footage showed that he had been the last person to see Dios Kyairi alive. Once the police had that footage, they moved quickly. They obtained a search warrant for the home where Alberto lived with Bernarda and the children, and what they found there only deepened their suspicions. Clothing that matched what the man in the video had been wearing, other items that connected him directly to the crime scene, and all of it pointed to one conclusion, that Alberto had been the one to take Dios Kyairi's life. On September 3, while family and friends were gathered at the funeral home to say their final goodbyes to Dios Kyairi, while Bernarda was weeping over her daughter's casket, while everyone was mourning the loss of this beautiful young girl, the police arrived and arrested Alberto Sanche Reynoso in front of everyone. The scene was chaos. People were screaming, crying, trying to understand what was happening. Because how could this be? How could the man who had been standing by Bernarda's side, who had been helping with the search, who had been acting like a grieving stepfather, how could he be the one who had killed her? But the evidence was there, the footage was there, and as the days went on, more and more started to come out, more pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, and the picture that emerged was far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. After Alberto's arrest, Dios Kyairi's biological father came forward and told the police something that made everyone's blood run cold. He said that Dios Kyairi had told him Alberto was sexually abusing her, that she had been suffering in silence for months, that she had been too afraid to tell anyone because she didn't think they would believe her, because she thought she had nowhere to go, because the person who was supposed to protect her was the very person who was hurting her. Bernarda, Dios Kyairi's mother, later recalled comments that Alberto used to make to her daughter, how he would tell her she was beautiful, how he would say any man would want her, how he would compliment her appearance in ways that seemed innocent at the time, but now, looking back, made her stomach turn with horror and regret. Friends of Dios Kyairi also noticed that she had changed in the weeks before her death. She had become quieter, more withdrawn. She seemed sad and distracted, and when they asked her what was wrong, she would just smile and say everything was fine, but everything was not fine, and no one had pushed hard enough to find out the truth. There was also the long-distance boyfriend that Dios Kyairi had been talking to, a Dominican man living in Spain, and Alberto had been obsessed with this relationship. He had demanded that she end it. He had been jealous and controlling in ways that made no sense for a stepfather, and Dios Kyairi had refused to give in, and for her family, that refusal was what sealed her fate. Alberto's brother was also arrested at first, because the police suspected he might have helped move the body or cover up the crime. But Alberto eventually confessed and told the investigators that he had acted alone, and the forensic evidence supported that claim. He was strong enough to have done it by himself, so his brother was released, and all of the responsibility fell squarely on Alberto's shoulders. The police also found video evidence of Alberto buying the liquid accelerant that he had used to try to burn Dios Kyairi's body, and friends testified that Dios Kyairi had told them she was meeting Alberto that day because he had promised to help her find a job. She had trusted him. She had gotten into his car willingly, and he had killed her. In 2018, Alberto Antonio Sanchez Reynoso went to trial for the murder of his 17-year-old stepdaughter, and the prosecution presented all of the evidence: the security footage, the accelerant purchase, the testimony of family and friends. And after hearing it all, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to 30 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under Dominican law. But for Bernarda, for Dios Kyairi's father, for everyone who loved her, that sentence could never bring her back, could never undo what had been done, could never erase the image of her body burning in that field, could never answer the question that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. How could they have missed the signs? How could they have let this happen under their own roof? How could they have trusted the very person who would go on to destroy their family? And the answer is that abusers are experts at hiding. They are experts at manipulation. They are experts at making everyone around them believe they are someone they are not. And by the time the truth comes out, it is almost always too late. Dios Kyairi Gómez was 17 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted to help people. She wanted to make a difference. And she never got the chance because the person who was supposed to protect her was the person who took everything from her. There are crimes that shake us to our core, that make us question everything we thought we knew about safety and trust. And this is one of them, because the danger wasn't lurking in the shadows. It wasn't a stranger in a dark alley. It was right there in her own home, sitting at her own dinner table, smiling at her mother, pretending to be a father, and no one saw it until it was too late.